Welcome in to Locked On Knicks. Alex Wolf and Gavin Shaw here, and All-Star Weekend is over. 3 Knicks participated, none emerged victorious. So we'll talk about that. And then, in honor of President's Day, we are going to do a draft of the worst Knicks presidents from 2000 onward, and go from worst to first. And you might be happy with the guy who's first. Next on Locked On Knicks.
You are Locked On Knicks, your daily New York Knicks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, welcome in to Locked On Knicks. We want to thank you guys for making Locked On Knicks your first listen today and every day, whether you're checking us out on your favorite podcast platform or taking in the sights and sounds on YouTube. We appreciate you making us part of your daily routine. And if you haven't hit the subscribe button and the notification bell on YouTube already, or the subscribe button and the auto download function on your favorite podcast app, make sure to do that so you never miss an episode, because we are here 5 days a week, even on President's Day. I'm Alex Wolf. I'm editor-in-chief of Knicks site, The Strickland, which you can find at thestrick.land. He's Gavin Shaw, your favorite play-by-play broadcaster's favorite play-by-play broadcaster. And the All-Star Weekend just happened, Gavin, and there was a surprisingly large amount of Knicks involvement. I kind of wish that in the end, Giannis had decided to just not play, so that Brunson could have gotten a All-Star berth, because he probably would have been the guy to slot into that extra East spot. But I'm not salty. Who's salty? I'm not. But the 3 Knicks did some stuff, and that started with Quentin Grimes in the Rising Stars game.
Yeah, Grimes was fantastic. 27 points over the course of the 2 games. Shot it super duper well, and just looked like, look, obviously part of it is that the defense just isn't going to be as intense, but he just looked so in control and at his own pace. Finished 10 for 14, 6 for 10 from 3-point range, and showed off really every aspect of his game. Like you really saw flashes of great athleticism. He had 3 dunks over the course of the 2 games, including 1 lob dunk in transition. Had a really nice backdoor cut where he got the dimed up by Josh Giddey for the jam. I'd love to see him and Brunson do that action a little bit more. Like we see it every once in a while, but 1 or 2 of those a game would just be golden. But to me, the single biggest thing was just the rhythm he got in. And I think a big part of it was that he just slowed down a little bit, Alex. Like I've been harping on this for weeks with Quentin Grimes, that especially in crunch time situations, he tends to really rush his shot. And it's so mechanically perfect. And he has such a high release and such easy elevation. Like he rarely is going to have a contest that is bothersome enough to force him to do that. And I just want him to play at his own pace and shoot at his own pace, because I think we're looking at a guy who is a 40% 3-point shooter. And I think now Knicks Film School, Tom Piccolo had this stat in the newsletter today. I think in the last 9 games, he's at something around 27%. But that's just not who Quentin Grimes is. And you could see the shooting talent in this game. The last shot he hit was a step back 30-footer. The guy is just ridiculous. He won game 1 on a steal and a pull up 3. Like he is a capital S shooter. And I just want him to be able to show that on a game-to-game basis, because I think him refining the stride and the rhythm he had when he first entered the Knicks rotation at the beginning of this year can only elevate this team further.
Yeah, for sure. And I feel like, look, I'll go full disclosure. I didn't watch this event. I just caught the highlights later. So I'm basically totally off of that. But it seemed to me like he was running more like Summer League Grimes to a degree, like was being trusted to sort of be more of a primary option, but also was playing really well off of Josh Giddey. I wonder to myself if Wally Szczerbiak freaked out at any point and did his giddy thing during the game. But at any rate, yeah, I'm with you. I think that hopefully this was a nice opportunity for him to kind of loosen up a little bit. He does seem like he's been particularly since the Hart acquisition, maybe a little on edge, maybe about playing time. Seems to be a consistent theme with the Knicks, that any guy that's under the age of like 25 has to kind of just sit on pins and needles at all times. And you see them play a little high strung, if they're worried about a veteran taking their minutes. I think maybe that's the case for Grimes at the moment, but he seemed pretty relaxed and had some really impressive shot making, albeit in a All-Star game, but also he suddenly in these games started getting the treatment of like he had Jose Alvarado like climbing on his back like for half the last game or whatever. So I mean, it seems like he did pretty well given the circumstances, considering he was the only guy that got like actual defensive attention in this game. Also pretty cool that he managed to be the standout guy on a team that is not entirely ghosts of Knicks past, but had a few. Like he was on a team with Evan Mobley, Josh Giddey, Jalen Williams on the Thunder, who was one of the guys that the Knicks could have drafted with their 11th pick this past year. Jeremy Sohan, Jabari Smith Jr., Jalen Duren, who obviously is extremely linked to the Knicks, and Tari Eason, another guy that they could have taken with that draft pick this past year. So pretty interesting from that perspective that he was on that squad and managed to be the star of the show. Moving on to the dunk contest, we had Jericho Sims in there against Mac McClung, who wound up winning it, Trey Murphy III, and KJ Martin. I watched this, so I met up with some of my Strickland pals, and we were watching this dunk contest. We didn't have audio, so I wasn't able to like follow along with what the live like audio reaction was of the people on the broadcast or whatever. But I thought Jericho got kind of robbed, honestly. He had two dunks that I think people have become desensitized to because like you've seen the highlights of Vince Carter doing the cookie jar so many times that you're just like, oh, that's an iconic dunk, but now other guys have done it and whatever. It's not that impressive anymore, except for the fact that Jericho Sims got both of his arms in to do a double cookie jar. And literally that requires you putting like your entire chest above the rim while you're dunking, which is absolutely insane. Yes, he got the arm in at first, the left arm, it kind of slid out and then he had to like pop it back in. But also, if you look at how his arms were, that looked incredibly uncomfortable. So I'm happy that he let the arm pop out at first at risk of, I guess, like dislocating his shoulder or something if he would have left it in there at first. But that was an extremely high degree of difficulty. And stupid Karl Malone gave it like a 43 or 44 or something, which dragged his overall score down to 47.6 across the judges. And then his second dunk somehow scored higher, but again was dragged down by Karl Malone, where he went all the way up to his elbow, all the way up to his armpit in the hoop and grabbed an envelope and then struggled opening it, but the envelope said 50 in it. I don't know. Gavin, I don't know if you watched the dunk contest or the dunks. Trey Murphy pulled out some pretty impressive stuff. I think that his one dunk was actually the best dunk of anybody, including Mac McClung. I thought McClung's dunks were a little overrated, but I thought Sims got robbed in the first round.
Yeah, I'm not a huge dunk contest guy, but he is a unique athlete for his size. There is something about 6'1" guys doing it that like it's a weird concept, right? Because it's never actually the best dunks, right? It's just sort of like, all right, like what kind of like tickled my brain the most when I saw it, and I guess there's something about short guys just flying through the air, because I'm with you. Like, I think having watched clips of it, I would have given it to Trey Murphy, if not Jericho. But 3-point contest, Julius Randle did not do great, 13 points. Somehow Kevin Huerter got 8, which is crazy because that guy is
terrible. It was so bad.
Yeah, a bona fide shooter. I don't know. Maybe he's just in his own head. But you know what? Julius not finishing last in that field, kind of an upset. I'll take it.
Yeah, I mean, he also didn't finish his round. He was just way too nonchalant about it. I mean, he got to the final rack. He had like 7 seconds left. I was like, Julius, what are you doing? And then he just starts like winging the balls out in his final rack. It was not pretty. But his style of play isn't really made for a 3-point shooting contest. Evan Fournier put it best on Twitter. He was like, maybe they, if they introduce one of these where you have to take 2 jab steps or a step back before you shoot the 3, Julius would be in perfect shape and would probably win. But this just isn't his game. So, but it was fun seeing him participate anyway. Speaking of being fun seeing him participate, he was on Team LeBron in the actual All-Star game. Ended with 11 points, 2 rebounds, 2 assists. My biggest takeaway was he wasn't the last pick in the draft. There was a part of me that worried that he was going to be the last pick in the All-Star draft, and yet he was like LeBron's like 5th pick, I think. So he got pretty comfortably taken with like, I think 5-6 players left on the board still after him. So that was cool. Otherwise in the game, didn't make too much of an impact. He kind of just was like under the hoop a lot and just happened to keep getting these like guys would be like, oh man, I tried to do some crazy crap, but it didn't work out. So I'm just going to feed it to Julius right under the hoop and he could just get the free points. And that was pretty much his whole game. I don't know. He never got to bring the ball up to my memory. Did he take a three? I think he made 1 3. That's how he got to 11. I don't know. I don't remember. It wasn't particularly memorable, but he's not really in like that. For one, I don't think he's in that top tier of guys that really get the opportunity to shine at the All-Star game. But then also, I just don't think like he didn't really seem super interested in like doing what like Jason Tatum did or whatever and just being like, I'm going to score like 50 points today, just because I feel like he kind of seemed, I won't say disinterested, but not super into the All-Star game.
I mean, that was kind of universal to everyone in it, like basically outside of Tatum and Dame. Oh, it's depressing, right? Because I don't know about you, I love the All-Star game growing up, and I mean, it's a big Bill Simmons thing, but I totally agree with it. Like the fourth quarters, like that is a unique basketball viewing experience, and that you don't even get this in the Olympics. Like where you literally, I mean, maybe like those U.S. Spain years, you kind of got to that point, but the best players in the world playing by NBA rules with an NBA ball, going as hard as they possibly can at each other. Like the fourth quarter of the All-Star game is traditionally the one time you got that, and you really did get to see what the pecking order was at the top 10. Like we can have those debates, we can have those conversations all we want, but you would get like how it was almost like Darwinism. Like you would get to see it play out, and it seemed like the Elam ending saved that for a few years, but maybe now that's become old hat. Maybe it was a little lackluster because arguably like the four faces of the NBA, like Steph, LeBron, Giannis, were all out of the game. And I'm forgetting who my fourth is in that mix. But yeah, so maybe not the four, maybe the three faces of the NBA. All those guys were out. But it felt like no one was really interested at the end. And to your point, like Randle, like he could have had 36 points, probably on 18 of 18 shooting, because if Randle had put his head down and gone to the rim to dunk every time, no one would have stopped him. But it becomes this awkward thing where like, if half the guys don't care, you look kind of bad for trying, especially if you don't make shots when you try. And that's why you get just dunks and threes, because no one wants to like be going hard against air basically on national TV. And it was kind of a brutal viewing experience for that reason.
Yeah, and in the end, too, I guess cautionary tale, LeBron ends up hurting his hand during the All-Star game and winds up having to sit out the second half. So I guess that's the cautionary tale of going hard during the All-Star
Kevin Durant was the fourth person I was thinking of, by the way.
Oh, yeah, Durant was out, too. Yeah, it was a pretty brutal All-Star game this year. Honestly, not a great All-Star weekend in general, too, even when you have, like, the media tried so hard to get guys interested in the dunk contest, and, like, Ja Morant, Anthony Edwards last night during the broadcast, like all these guys just like, no, I'm never doing the dunk contest. And it's like, great. So like nobody cares about this huge event that the NBA puts on. So like, why do they even put it on at this point? Like just hand out the awards and just be like, it's done. Like you get an all-star berth and that's it. Or find some new way to make it happen. Like make a 3-on-3 tournament or something, like anything to make it more interesting at this point. If this is going to be how it's going to go. Anyway, Gavin, we have our own award to hand out, which I will pass off to you because we're going to give it to one of the players we just talked about.
Yeah, a thrilling opportunity. We get to award Nissan's most electric player of the week, and it's brought to you by the all-new, all-electric 2023 Nissan Ariya. And our player is Quentin Grimes. After drop, look, he was the lone Knick to have a monster performance this week with those 27 points. I would describe his game as brilliantly fierce, right? Because you have that just in your face aggressive style of defense. But then there's also like this fierce elegance there, right? Like with how he rises up in traffic, doesn't really matter. Like he had Mac McClung on him one time, just put one right in his eye. And then just the stunning power of him in transition on those dunks and the velocity and ferocity with which he rises to the rim. I feel like I'm having a Clyde moment here, Alex, doing this ad. But the point is the 2023 Nissan Ariya packs pin to your seat power and premium intelligence all in one EV. The all new, all electric 2023 Nissan Ariya, the EV for people who love to drive. You can shop now at nissanusa.com. All right, and with that, we are back on Locked On Knicks. It is our first annual president/GM draft on President's Day. Alex, this was your concept. I'm going to gift you the first pick. We're going worst to first, so the idea is we are going to take the worst Knicks presidents over the last 25 years, and then we'll work our way up to the semi-competent by the end.
Yeah, so we start at the turn of the century as the starting point. We did choose to include Scott Layden as well, who coincidentally is going to be my first pick. I thought it would be so much more fun to go worst to first than first to worst, because the lows are fun to look back on now that the Knicks seem to be sort of on their way out of the doldrums finally. Scott Layden's my first pick. He was the Knicks GM from August of 1999 to December of 2003. He took over after the 99 finals run, which I'm well on the record as being my first year of like Knicks fandom as a kid. I was 9 years old at that time. So this guy basically ruined my childhood. So the good for Scott Layden, very short list, at least by my estimation. He signed Latrell Sprewell to an extension, which was a home run after the 99 finals run. And then he re-signed Kurt Thomas, which was also sort of a home run too. I mean, Kurt Thomas, Knicks legend. Then the bad. Pretty much everything else is bad. He drafted Frederick Weiss over Ron Artest in the 1999 draft, one of the most notorious blunders in Knicks draft history. He traded Patrick Ewing for a bunch of guys that never played. And he also got back 2 firsts, except for then he rerouted one of them for Othello Harrington. That pick would become Jamal Tinsley eventually, who had a very long and productive NBA career. And he rerouted the other first-round pick for old, washed-up Mark Jackson and Muggsy Bogues, who would not play anything for the Knicks. So managed to make what by today's standards would be a great trade, getting rid of Patrick Ewing at that point in Ewing's career and everything, and yet then managed to squander it by trading the first-round picks for nothing. He signed Allen Houston to his giant $100 million deal, despite him being 30 and eventually having to retire midway through the contract due to knee problems. Maybe a physical would have been helpful there before handing out a $100 million contract. He traded for Howard Isley and Shannon Anderson, which was basically just a swap of role players, except for Isley and Anderson were from the Jazz, where he was previously, or at least I think Isley was, but they were signed to these ridiculously long and expensive contracts that hamstrung the Knicks financially for a really long time. He also traded the draft rights to Nene, who, again, long, productive NBA career, Marcus Camby, who was still a productive NBA player at the time, and Mark Jackson, who, again, he had just gotten in a prior deal, for Antonio McDyess, who only managed to play 18 games for the Knicks, again, due to catastrophic knee problems. So, again, what was going on with the Knicks medical staff under Scott Layden? The world may never know. Also took Mike Sweetney and Masige Lamp in the 2003 draft, one of the most loaded drafts of all time. The Knicks walk away with nothing. He traded Latrell Sprewell for Keith Van Horn, which there was some tension going on there with Sprewell about wanting a new contract and everything, which he refused to give him. Sprewell still went on to have some semi-productive years with the Timberwolves. Keith Van Horn didn't do much with the Knicks. And as his last move to kind of hammer home how bad he was, he signed super old Dikembe Mutombo to a 2-year deal as his last move with the Knicks. So Scott Layden, congrats, buddy. You are the worst GM of the last 20-something years for the Knicks, which is really saying something.
It's a golden accomplishment, man. It's gonna go down in his personal record books. I assumed with the second pick that I was going to be drafting Isiah Thomas, because he was kind of the bane of my initial run of Knicks fandom, inexplicably trading first round picks, like Yu-Gi-Oh cards at the playground. But he is not, because as we're going to go over, purely in a basketball sense, he did some good stuff for the Knicks. Someone who did not do a lot of good stuff for the Knicks, at least as a president / GM, was Phil Jackson. His tenure ran from March 18th, 2014 to June 28th, 2017. We'll start off with the good. He drafted Kristaps Porzingis. That was a whatever it turned into eventually. That was a fantastic pick. And in a world where, and look, obviously this is something to your point on everything that was wrong with Scott Layden, this is something you have to take into account with player acquisition. But in a world where Porzingis does not deal with all the injuries and his body holds up and his athleticism holds up, I think you're looking at a top 10 player in the league. Like, I think that was the trajectory he was on. He was incredible at the start of his final season with the Knicks, and his ability, even today, like where he's playing really well and probably could have been in the mix for an all-star berth this year, like that doesn't capture what the ceiling was there with his athleticism, shot making, and size. And Phil recognized that when not a lot of other people, like certainly no one in the building that night who was wearing blue and orange, really was cognizant of that. So give Phil all the credit in the world for that. You noted this one that I almost forgot about, that there was a trade on the table. So this one could be good, but it's clearly transitioning us into bad. Kind of wanted to trade KP before that situation got to its nadir for Devin Booker and a pick that eventually became Josh Jackson. Would have been like we were like kind of joking about it before, but like that would have, I think, erased everything bad that he did if the Knicks had somehow gotten Devin Booker early in his career. And you could easily say, all right, but the Knicks would have screwed Booker up. He wouldn't have been what he was in the Suns. The Suns have been just as bad as the Knicks, at least for the previous from 2017 to the start of the 2020 season. So that would have been that would have made up for everything, but whether because of pressure from other members of the front office, James Dolan, fans, including myself, who protested in front of MSG when that was on the table, didn't happen. Let's go over the bad now. The Joakim Noah contract. Yikes! That one is one of the worst contracts in NBA history. The first Derrick Rose deal to orchestrate the alleged Knicks super team. Did not work out. D Rose was not who he was in his second tenure with the Knicks. The Carmelo Anthony situation, where it's so interesting, Alex. I don't even really remember like the details of that, but I just, in my mind, it was this constant malaise with Melo where you're like, oh, there's another story about how he's unhappy. And it kind of turned into like a tabloid melodrama, no pun intended, more than a basketball team at a certain point.
Yeah, and Phil just continually needled and needled and needled. It was just like every time Phil got a mic in front of him, he threw a pot shot at Melo or someone else on the team. It was just like that was kind of his thing. We could also, real quick, the last things of Phil's thing, because I'm with you. I actually think I would take Phil over Isiah too, as crazy as that is to say, because Isiah was kind of the boogeyman of my, mid Knicks fandom as well. But alienated JR and Shumpert to the point of trading them for basically nothing. And, JR was being stupid before he got traded. So, they kind of had to move on from him, but also like he did nothing to help these dudes' values and then traded them for like, again, essentially nothing just to get them off the team. Had a horrible taste in head coaches, had Derek Fisher, Kurt Rambis, and Jeff Hornacek were his three coaches that he employed. Like Hornacek was the best, and he was just like painfully mediocre. That was the best you could possibly say about any of his head coach candidates. And then this is more a Dolan thing than a Phil thing, but got to control the Knicks' first round draft pick and draft a guy like 3 days before he got fired, which is insane. Like they should have just made the decision before that. So that's more on Dolan than Phil. But Gavin, we'll take our second break real quick and come back, and things will start improving. We've already crossed the worst. Although, spoiler alert, Isaiah Thomas is coming up in just a second, so things aren't going to get that much better. But first, I got to remind everybody that today's show is brought to you by Built Bar. And if you're looking for a delicious treat, but you don't want all the fat and calories, you got to try a Built Bar. Hopefully, you're still keeping up with your New Year's resolution and staying fit and trim and eating healthy. I know I'm trying to do that too. And Built Bars have helped a lot because they make me feel like I'm eating a candy bar, and it does not seem like I'm eating a protein bar. It's certainly not an unenjoyable experience like it is to eat so many other protein bars. I find myself craving Built Bars. Why is that? That's because they're covered in 100% real chocolate, and they come in unbelievable flavors like churro, peanut butter brownie, and coconut almond, my personal favorite. And the macros are fantastic. They have only 130 calories and 4 grams of sugar, but a whopping 17 grams of protein per bar. And the good news is now you don't have to wait around to get a box. For years, we've been talking about ordering your Built Bars at Built.com, but now you can also get them at your local Walmart or Sam's Club. That's right. Head to your nearest Walmart today, walk to the pharmacy section, and grab yourself a box of Built Bars. You can pick up a 4-bar box of cookies and cream, double chocolate, or coconut puffs. All fantastic choices. And if you're close to Sam's Club, run in and grab a 13-bar box with their hit flavors, brownie batter and churro. You can thank me later. All right, we're back to continue our worst to first Knicks president and GM draft to celebrate President's Day. Fun little nod to President's Day today, but a fun little nod to some of the worst parts of Knicks history of the last 20 something years. Because again, now we can like gleefully look back at the bad times and be like, well, now things are so much better. My next one is a guy that I can't believe made it to third, to be completely honest. But also, I'm with you. I think I actually, in retrospect, I dislike Phil more than I do this guy. Isiah Thomas, though. I mean, he can't possibly make it past this spot because he was just terrible. The good with him, there was a surprising amount of good I found. Like the Marbury trade maybe was an overpay. Like it was a little ludicrous to give away a 2010 first round pick in 2003. However, like, you know, even though that pick ended up being Gordon Hayward, like I think that was a good swing to take. Like Marbury was obviously at the peak of his talents at that time and put together some good performances for the Knicks. It was kind of just a fault of Isiah at that point, not giving him a good coach and not giving him good pieces around him. But like Marbury himself was actually quite good when they traded for him. So I thought that was a worthwhile deal. He got Zach Randolph for washed up Steve Francis and Channing Frye, which like Zach Randolph had some of his own problems at the time as well. Like he and the Blazers were butting heads a lot and whatever, but that was from a pure value perspective, a really good trade. And we saw later on after Zach Randolph was gone from the Knicks that he still had a lot left in the tank and a lot to give to a good team. He had a surprisingly good late draft record. He took David Lee at pick 30, Nate Robinson in the late 20s. He found Trevor Ariza in the second round, only to stupidly trade him away later. Wilson Chandler in the late teens. So that was even though Wilson Chandler, a lot of people raised their eyebrows at, but he turned into quite a good player. And then he traded a bunch of like just washed veterans for Jamal Crawford, which was kind of a coup too. Like Jamal Crawford was a really good player and had some really good Knicks moments, but the bad far outweighs the good. Eddie Curry trade. He, in that deal, moved picks that would eventually become LaMarcus Aldridge and Joakim Noah for Eddie Curry. Also gave Eddie Curry a giant contract extension at the time too, which was up until the Joakim Noah contract, probably one of the worst deals in Knicks history. He had by far the highest payroll in the league for the Knicks in 2005 to 2006, yet they finished with the second worst record in the NBA. Spent huge money on Jared Jeffries and Jerome James, amongst others. He just had like my take on Isiah Thomas was he was a good talent evaluator that should have never had access to the checkbook because the guy just could not value players for anything. He stupidly traded Trevor Ariza to the Magic for a washed up Steve Francis, who he then eventually traded for a actually good Zach Randolph. So I guess maybe that comes out of wash, but still stupid to trade Ariza. He also didn't have a spotless draft record, even if he had some hits. He used picks on Ronaldo Balkman, Marty Collins, a number of other guys like that. And of course, he had a very high profile sexual harassment case that dragged the Knicks into the news. And yeah, that was not great. So all in all, I mean, maybe the sexual harassment thing should have dragged him below Phil Jackson in the end, but we're trying to look at it mostly from just a pure basketball perspective, but he sucked. He was not good. And he also head coached for a little bit, and that was terrible too. There was really very little good about the Isiah Thomas era. But I think the thing that differentiates him from the Phil Jackson era is he at least left the Knicks with something on his way out that was useful, such as David Lee.
Yeah. The David Lee pick was incredible. That almost single-handedly swung me not taking Isiah Thomas at that spot. And then I was thinking back on his track record. I mean, to your point, Robinson, Ariza, Chandler, like there's just a lot of like just beloved players of my childhood there. And I kind of got a warm feeling, Alex, which I never thought I would associate with Isiah Thomas. When you were going through that, I was like, all right, like these are like those teams were never great, but there were a bunch of guys that helped me fall in love with basketball there that like, and kind of made me appreciate some of the subtleties of the game. Like whether it was Channing Frye's like perimeter shooting, whether it was Lee banging inside, Robinson flying through the air, Ariza, even though he barely lasted on the Knicks, doing some good role player stuff. Yeah. All right. So now I'm kind of in a bind here because I am debating Steve Mills versus Donnie Walsh. And I feel like Steve Mills on the whole was much steadier and just didn't do anything like that consequential one way or another. But David Fizdale is almost so unforgivable that I'm almost prepared to take him anyways, despite that. But I think I'm gonna go. Yeah, I'm gonna go Steve Mills here. Who did some good stuff for the Knicks. Like the Kristaps Porzingis trade has obviously aged really, really well. For the most part, it got the Knicks Emmanuel Quickly. It got the Knicks Derrick Rose via acquiring Dennis Smith Jr. It also has them with the Dallas Mavericks draft pick this year, which could turn into someone very, very good, and then that would make that trade like look even better. You know what? I'm talking myself out of it. Last second pivot. I'm going Donnie Walsh. There was some like he did some decent stuff as I'm talking it out. And then Donnie, like in my mind, like his tenure wasn't like was pretty good, but the Melo trade just so like thoroughly like undid a lot of the good stuff that like I like him drafting Danilo Gallinari, bringing in I'm pretty sure because he brought in Raymond Felton for that first run with Amari Stoudemire. Like that was even, I mean, obviously it only ended up being 2 years before 12-13, but that was like the first Knicks team of my life, like the first 40 games of the year that I felt like you could guilt-free fall in love with. And then he just blew it up because he didn't want to like wait on Carmelo Anthony. And like maybe there's a world where Melo gets dealt to Brooklyn and stays there. And ultimately, like given what happened with him on the Knicks, like maybe that would have been fine. Like, I don't know. Like the Knicks just finally had a likable young team. And then it was kind of crushed. And then you also noted here that he telegraphed that the Knicks wanted Steph Curry. I don't know. You can correct me on this. I think the bigger sin there is that like he didn't find a way, if he was that in love with Steph, to trade up and get him. And like obviously in retrospect, you'd say, oh, give 5 first-round picks for him. And like Steph wasn't that sure of a thing at the time. But if you're really in love with a player and like you had to give him a future first to go get that guy, and you thought he was going to be a key piece, they should have done it, because I think it's a little bit of revisionist history to say like, oh, like the Knicks could have gotten him, because the whole thing at the time, it wasn't even just that the Warriors like eventually became enamored with him. It was that the Suns and Steve Kerr were going to trade for him, and they were going to trade Amari Stoudemire for him. So I think if the Warriors didn't get him, the Suns would have traded up for him, but the Knicks could have traded up even higher and potentially had gotten him. So that is certainly a big time L in retrospect. And then he got Amari Stoudemire, but to your point, did not get insurance on that contract. And ultimately, as we saw, like this is a repeated pattern with the Knicks in the 2000s. Like it was kind of a bag of false goods with Amari, just because his health issues were tragically so severe. Because again, the first 40 games of that, it looked not to put bad juju on our guy Jalen, but it's very similar to what we're seeing from Jalen Brunson now, where this guy just came in and became the face of the team.
Yeah, I ultimately, Donnie is not high on my list of like former, like I think that we'll get to him in a minute, but like Glenn Grunwald of that era was way, way better than Donnie Walsh. He kind of like cleaned up a lot of Donnie Walsh's messes, because I thought that Donnie Walsh did not do a good job. Like I'll just quickly give my 2 cents on a couple of the things there. Like I think that he went way too scorched earth trying to clear the Isiah era to get ready for LeBron. And yet in the process, then just basically like from the second that he took over, the Knicks was just like fire sale, except for we're not going to actually ask for value. It would be like if Danny Ainge went to the Jazz and was like, oh, well, I'm ready to move on. So like here, Donovan Mitchell for like 1 first-round pick, whatever. Or like Donovan Mitchell for just like a couple role players here. I just want him off the team. I want to start fresh, and get ready for the new era. And like here, Rudy Gobert for, whatever, like a couple role players. It's like, that was what he did with like actually talented players on the Knicks. Like the only good remnants of the Isiah era, like Zach Randolph, who was still very talented, like Jamal Crawford, who was very talented. He was just like, here, anybody who wants them, take it. It was like he put a free sign on them and left them by the curb, and it was just terrible. So that was one thing. The Melo trade, he like totally folded and gave the Nuggets whatever they wanted. And you could say that was Dolan all you want or whatever, but the fact is he signed his name on the deal in the end. And so that was ultimately him that did that. And yeah, I think that the other thing with the Steph Curry situation was that on top of telegraphing it so much and making it so public that the Knicks wanted Curry, he then completely panicked and was clearly unprepared when the team ahead of the Knicks were like, oh, I wonder why they want this guy so bad, and took him. And then was like, oh, crap, we have no contingency, and took Jordan Hill when, and I mean, this is not revisionist history. DeMar DeRozan and Brandon Jennings especially were way better prospects on the board right there, ready to be taken. Brandon Jennings was very much viewed as like, a great consolation prize for if you didn't get Steph Curry or whatever. And actually it was surprising that Jennings had even fallen as far as he did at that point, based off where he was projected to go prior to that draft. Like he could have taken either of them. And even for how Brandon Jennings' career ultimately went, like his first few years in the league, that would have looked amazing. And probably he could have been the centerpiece of the Melo trade later on. And you wouldn't have had to, do all these crazy machinations that you wound up having to do. But anyway, yeah, Donnie Walsh was no good. And you talked about a bunch of the other reasons too. So I'll move to Steve Mills. I mean, I think that his tenure was okay. Like, obviously, like you said, we've seen some things that he did that are still paying dividends for the Knicks. The KP trade, ultimately, I think is going to be the biggest thing that defines his era. And we're still seeing that pay out. Like the Knicks have another draft pick this year. Couple other good things that he did. The Tim Hardaway deal. I mean, I know that's polarizing, but I think it wasn't perfect, but it wasn't bad either. Like, he ultimately was a pretty good player given the amount of money that he was paid, especially considering when that deal was handed out, like right after the cap spike and everything. Everybody was giving out crazy money. And yet Tim Hardaway has been given that same deal like 2 more times now since that time. So, I mean, obviously that's just kind of his value as an NBA player. The Melo trade seemed kind of underwhelming at the time, but ultimately got them Mitch. And then obviously he drafted Mitch, which is great. It found Alonzo Trier as an undrafted free agent, which for all of his flaws, that guy dropped 30 plus multiple times as a rookie. Like, that was a really good find at the time. And there's no doubting that. And had a surprisingly solid 2019 free agency class that just kind of took another year to find its footing with Julius Randle, Reggie Bullock, Taj Gibson, Bobby Portis. The TBD with him, drafted RJ before Darius Garland, and that's not revisionist history. Like, they were actually considering Darius Garland. We'll see how that ends up working out in the end. Missed on KD and Kyrie, you noted in here, Gavin, and that's sort of another TBD. I think that's probably for the best at this point. So I'd almost put that in the positive, even though it was a strikeout at the time. But then the bad stuff, David Fizdale was just a horrible coach, and they held on to him for too long. Somehow, even though they only gave him a season and a quarter or whatever, they still somehow held on to him for too long. Ron Baker's contract will always be a thorn in my side. I hated that deal. It was so stupid. They gave him like $5 million a year when he was a veteran minimum player, and gave him a no trade clause, which was absolutely insane, and a player option that he of course picked up, because Ron Baker was never going to get paid $5 million ever in his career again. They made the Emmanuel Mudiay deal, which was a very low investment, but ultimately the time investment that they gave to Emmanuel Mudiay over a guy that they had drafted and Frank Ntilikina was really stupid. And then, of course, took Kevin Knox in the 2018 draft ahead of Mikal Bridges, Miles Bridges, and Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, amongst others. Also not a great move. So, yeah, Steve Mills, a up and down history. But, Gavin, I think that sends us along to our final 2 guys. And these last 2, I think, left a good legacy with the Knicks in the end.
Yeah, this is it's pretty interesting now that we're at the high end of this. We have Glenn Grunwald, and of course our beloved, even though he won't talk to the media, Alex, Leon Rose. I think I'm going to go Leon here, which is it feels weird doing that, because Leon, it feels like he's done so much more than Glenn Grunwald did, and almost that there's more nuance to his moves and there's more thought, and like it's clear just the resources that Leon has. Like I don't think Glenn Grunwald had the equivalent of a Brock Aller on that staff, and the Knicks have leveraged that brilliantly at points with the way like they've procured 2nd round picks and the way they've made moves on the margins, and of course Jalen Brunson. But I just feel like a lot of like what Grunwald did was was pretty. Oh wait, I forgot we're drafting bad first. All right, but whatever. I'll stick with Grunwald. Because as you noted, and I didn't I forgot about till now. Grunwald was also the architect of the Bargnani trade, which is kind of like the sour pill that just does not exist in Leon's tenure. Like, I mean, you could argue Elfrid Payton starting for a full year was bad, but man, there was nothing that Bargnani trade. Oh God, I completely forgot about that. Okay, but the good for Grunwald. He got Tyson Chandler as his first major move, which just catapulted the Knicks, right? More than anything else, having Chandler to anchor the defense the same way Melo did on offense is what turned that team into a 54-win team and the most beloved Knicks team, at least, Alex, of your and I's living memory. Well, I guess for you of 99, but for me, certainly the most beloved team of all time, bringing in Steve Novak, Jeremy Lin, which of course is an incredible move, J.R. Smith, Kenyon Martin, Marcus Camby, and Kurt Thomas were in their like early 60s at that point, but somehow still contributed on those teams. Drafted THJ, drafted Shumpert. Oh man, dude, early Shumpert. I mean, I not quite in the same way, but he's there with Kristaps and like a guy like if he hadn't gotten hurt, like I just think like. I mean, maybe he still would be in the league, but certainly for his first 5-6 years, like the level of athleticism he has, people forget what early Iman Shumpert was like. That guy, like in my mind, like it was kind of the RJ thing a little bit, but almost more exciting in that, like, oh, if he ever gets his jumper down, he's an all-star is what it felt like to me. And maybe I was over exuberant in my high school youth, but man, oh man, I loved Iman Shumpert. But yeah, kind of Glenn Grunwald was like similar to Steve Mills, to your point, like the high highs, like low lows. But I think, I mean, when you compare him to Mills, like there's just nothing like that 12-13 team that he put together.
Yeah, it was, you know what? I may have accidentally attributed Shumpert to him as well. Apparently that was Donnie Walsh, but whatever.
Oh, got it.
He empowered Shumpert throughout his career. Yeah, I think Grunwald was largely up until the Bargnani deal. And then after that, the not making the Lowry deal, which both those things apparently were Dolan, which I think was why Grunwald eventually, his tenure ended in a resignation, I think, rather than like an outright firing, if I remember correctly. Both those things were not fantastic, but also, I mean, just the high for him was the 12-13 season. The low was architecting that 13-14 season, which was like one of the biggest disappointments of my Knicks life at that point, which gives Leon Rose the top spot, which I'm glad ultimately, whether you meant to do it or not, that Leon Rose ends up number one here, because I think that he has done the best so far. I mean, Jalen Brunson, I think you put one of the better signings of the league in general in the last 5 years. And I agree. And I also think he's maybe the best Knicks signing of the modern era, like period, of from 2000 and now. And probably you can date back into the Ewing years, as far as just pure signings go. Especially as like a free agent that wasn't traded for and then re-signed. He's just a fantastic pickup by them. He's drafted really, really well with Grimes, Quickly, Deuce, Jericho, Rokas Jokubaitis potentially when he comes over. Like, we'll see how that works out. But that, he's killing it in Europe. So, like, the draft record has been pretty spotless in the late first round. He didn't trade Randle, which is a good thing. Ultimately, like, we would have traded Randle a couple times over the last few years, and he didn't, and saw it through, and it's worked out really well. And then he signed Tom Thibodeau and then also has kept Tom Thibodeau as the coach, which is working out pretty well this year. But yeah, I mean, he's done pretty well. You put in the too early to tell, like the TBD section, the Donovan Mitchell deal, didn't ultimately pull the trigger on that. We'll see how that works out. It missed on a couple other opportunities where he could have traded up, also traded out of this past year's draft, which is still too early to tell. There's a couple of players he could have taken there that seem pretty decent this year. But as far as the bad, it's like I feel like you gotta get pretty nitpicky, because this team has really turned things around in a big way since he's come. The Cam Reddish thing, not fantastic use of assets. It's like, but then ultimately, if Josh Hart winds up really swinging what the Knicks do the rest of this year, maybe you say, you know what, even if it was nominally 2 first-round picks, it was worth it. Elfrid Payton existed and was able to still start another season under Leon Rose and under Tibbs. That should have never been able to happen. The Kemba situation and Evan Fournier, not fantastic, but in the end, they've been quick to under Leon. I think the Knicks have been quick to admit their mistakes and correct them, and have done a good job of making moves around the margins to have picks, like a ton of second round picks at any given time, stuff like that, to sort of quickly like take the eraser to a move and, scratch it out real quick and write someone else's name in. So I've liked the Leon Rose, the Leon Rose tenure so far, and the Knicks, I think, are set up really well for the future, and probably the best that they've been set up for the future in quite some time. And we'll see how it all works out. But I think if the Knicks become a consistent playoff team, and Brunson has a great career with them, and Randle finishes his career in New York or something, and things work out really good, I think in the end, if we do this again in 5 years, we'll be talking about Leon Rose and how his tenure has been easily the best one of our lifetimes.
Yeah, and I think it's fascinating because he's succeeding, but not in the way he was supposed to be succeeding, right? Because he was nominally like another swing at, all right, this is going to be the guy who brings a star to New York, right? CAA, we're going to get Booker, we're going to get Embiid, Towns is going to be in here, on and on and on, right? And none of those guys have made their way to New York. And yet, despite that, they've won on the margins, right? Late first-round picks. Emmanuel Quickly, you get maybe the sixth man of the year. Quentin Grimes, you get a guy who could be a starter for the Knicks for a decade plus. Those are outlier results with the 25th pick in the draft. You are lucky if you get a guy who plays 4 years in the NBA with the 25th pick in the draft. And the Knicks hit, if not 2 home runs, 2 triples at those 2 spots. So that, I think that cannot be underrated. And then we can look at the Jalen Brunson thing, right? And this was a guy who was just not valued properly by the rest of the league. Incredibly, was not valued properly by the team he spent his whole career on. And Leon Rose, sure, there were connections there, like a million of them, and the Knicks had every advantage, but he executed. He got Brunson to New York, and Brunson's been incredible. And again, the faith in Randle, we would have dealt him. He's made more good decisions than bad, and just a couple of truly exceptional ones. And you can't really point to one that has been incredibly damaging. With Alex, we just went through the whole list. Pretty much every other guy has one just awful decision on their ledger. And for Rose, keep fingers crossed. Whatever your lucky charm is, go grab it. And it hasn't happened yet. So that, I think that makes him a clear cut number one.
Yep, absolutely. And I think we can end this show on that happy note. So happy President's Day. I hope you enjoyed this President's ranking. But we'll have more shows coming up for you guys, including getting into your mailbag questions, which if you have any mailbag questions and you haven't submitted them yet, feel free to hit us up on Twitter or YouTube comments, wherever you want. And until next time, thank you all for listening, and we'll talk to you soon. Peace out.